Welcome to the Stoned Age Livin Podcast. This is your boy Life Locks. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Spotify at Stoned Age Livin, minus the G. We appreciate you for coming through. Cannabis producers in Canada are now offering value brands to compete with cheaper illegal market. The legal cannabis market in Canada grew 107% in 2019, but illegal sellers still dominate with 70% of sales, according to new data from Stats Canada. Total cannabis sales also declined 7% from the previous year, where illegal sellers held 86% of the market. In response to pressure from the illegal market, three of the largest cannabis producers, Canopy, Tilray, and Aurora, have launched lower-priced products or value brands that will average approximately $4 per gram with a THC count of 13 to 25%. Profitability continues to be an issue for Canadian cannabis producers. Earlier in February, Aurora announced the resignation of its CEO, a write-down of $744 million, and the layoff of 10% of its workforce as part of its effort to become profitable. Tilray also cut 10% of its workforce. Now, why does the black market continue to thrive with legal cannabis? Well, most of it comes from the tax regulations that they put on cannabis when they legalize it in a lot of places. They want the government to still profit from cannabis, and they want the taxes for cannabis to be applied specifically the way that they see fit. So they don't want to really miss out on any of the money that's going to be made in the cannabis trade. They feel like all parts of it should at some point be paying the government and giving back to the city. So whenever you do that and you impose a lot of these different types of taxes and you want to use it for all of these different policies, the only way you can project a budget of maybe $500,000 or $750,000 or maybe a couple $1 million is if you have higher taxes on cannabis, which is also what we've seen in states like Illinois that just legalized cannabis this year. So I guess the real question here would be, should there really even be a black market? And in terms of the farming situation, how they set it up, the cultivation of cannabis itself, I believe, should be legalized and decriminalized internationally. That would solve a lot of these problems and create an abundance of cannabis, which would drop the value of it, but in turn would also allow us to use cannabis for things that are made out of paper and plastic and cotton, maybe hemp bricks for different types of structures and things like that. There are literally over 50,000 products that we could be producing with cannabis. So I think the quicker that we get away from the money aspect of it, of who's going to get the money from it, the quicker that we'll see an actual reduction in cannabis prices, cannabis taxes, just across the board. We were talking, it was funny, we weren't even going to start the podcast, but it was so easy through Anchor. It's free. There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or on your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more places. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. In our second story today, more than 3 years after the passage of countywide cannabis tax Measure C and 2 years after the adoption of an ordinance to regulate commercial cannabis cultivation, no decisions have yet been made on how to spend the roughly $1.3 million that's been collected to date. The county's ordinance mentions specific potential channels to which the tax money could be pushed. These include enforcement, education, and environmental protection regarding cannabis, but allows for any governmental use of the revenue. Reading a letter from Lake County Cannabis Alliance, a group of local commercial cannabis cultivators, asked that the board consider using some of its tax revenue to fund a dedicated subject matter expert on the process of permitting for cannabis cultivation in Lake County. Such a position would ease the burden on current staff and make permitting processes more approachable. If we have money, we need to look at ways to make it benefit our communities. Now, this seems like something that it sounds like it got prolonged, or it's been getting prolonged. One of those things that they could maybe have a meeting and continue it, and then have another hearing and then continue it again. And then I definitely agree with the growers. They should be using most of this cash to, at least, or not most of it, but some of it, to fund a dedicated subject matter expert on the process of permitting cannabis for cultivation in Lake County. So that way, like they said, they can reduce some of the stress that they have in the department and create another branch. A lot of these pieces of governments that we have in place for these cannabis legalization and these cannabis decriminalized areas of different states and countries is that we need these new positions actually to be created within the government itself. A lot of the rules around cannabis operate within a certain party, but a lot of these parties need to be extended because they always have been, as you could say, flooded with work that they can't actually get to in a timely fashion. And that was before the legalization of cannabis. Now they're pushing all this work on people that already currently have jobs in other fields, and they primarily make up a lot of our experts. But we really need to create these separate branches of government to regulate cannabis in most of these situations. But putting more money back into the city in a planned, beneficial way to, benefit the community, as they said, you definitely couldn't go wrong with that. As for the other story, in terms of the black market still thriving with legal cannabis, and a similar thing is still going on in California. The actual revenue that they're generating from the cannabis sales isn't as much as they thought it was going to be. But that doesn't mean that there is less consumption of cannabis within California, I don't think, than the projected total amount. So this has been another episode of the Stoned Age Livin Podcast. Listen to hear LifeLocks cover the biggest cannabis headlines daily. Follow us at Stoned Age Livin on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Apple Music, Spotify, and anywhere else that you could possibly type it in. Tune in for cannabis news daily. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for checking in.